My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 38 years old, and I used to think keeping your head down was enough. Then I moved into a quiet neighborhood, ruled by a power-hungry HOA president named Todd. For 5 years, he fined us, bullied us, and smiled like he owned everything. But what Todd didn't know, is that I don't forget. And I don't forgive. This is how I made sure Todd's reign ended exactly the way it deserved to, with a long, painful goodbye. I moved to the neighborhood thinking I was buying peace. A quiet, tree-lined street. Birds chirping. Lawn so neat it looked like a movie set. I thought I had finally arrived at some kind of suburban paradise. But then, I met Todd. Todd was the HOA president. Middle-aged, smug, always dressed like he was heading to court, even on a Sunday. He walked with a clipboard and a superiority complex that could fill a stadium. I didn't think much of him at first. He seemed like one of those guys who takes yard work a little too seriously. But I had no idea, he wasn't just a rule follower, he was a power addict. The first warning came a week after I moved in. I had just brought in my trash bins, yes, just, when I found a bright orange notice taped to my door. It said I had violated HOA rule number 11, trash bins must be retrieved no later than 9 a.m. on collection day. Time of violation: 9:03 a.m. Fine: $200. I actually laughed. I thought it was a mistake. I even walked down the street thinking, this must be some automated system, maybe I'm the only newbie who doesn't know the rules. But no. It was Todd. He greeted me at the mailbox that afternoon like nothing had happened. I brought up the notice. He smirked and said, "Can't play favorites. Rules are rules." That phrase, "rules are rules," would become the soundtrack of my frustration. Over the next few months, I watched Todd fine people left and right. A woman whose lawn was overgrown by half an inch. A man who left his Christmas lights up 2 days past the HOA's deadline. A family who painted their front door a slightly different shade of blue. Meanwhile, Todd's own house. It was a zoning violation disaster. A backyard full of unpermitted sheds and structures. A fence way over the legal height. Trash bins permanently sitting on the side of the house. No one said anything. No one dared. Todd had power, and he wielded it like a sword. Anyone who tried to push back ended up with more fines, more threats, or mysteriously missing paperwork. Then it happened to me. I had just installed a new fence, same style, same height, same layout. But the wood stain. It was slightly different. Not by much. But the HOA's approved brand was out of stock, and I had provided receipts and everything. I emailed Todd, explained the situation, even offered to repaint when the right stain became available. Next day. Another notice. Violation, unapproved fence color. Fine, $500. This wasn't just ridiculous, it was personal. I confronted Todd at the next HOA meeting. Calmly. Respectfully. I explained the shortage. I offered a solution. He didn't even look at the receipts. Just stared at me with that smug grin and said, "Rules are rules." He walked out. Just like that. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about the fence. This was about control. About power. About a man who had built a little empire and ruled it like a petty tyrant. And I had just become his next example. I stood there, holding that violation notice, seething inside. Not yelling. Not screaming. Just planning. That night, I sat down with a notepad and wrote one sentence. Take Todd down. No drama. Just truth. I didn't want revenge through yelling matches or front lawn fights. I wanted justice that would stick, that would humiliate him not just publicly, but legally, permanently. I wasn't going to attack Todd. I was going to expose him. But to do that, I had to get inside. I started by showing up. At the next HOA meeting, I volunteered to be part of the events committee. Just a small, boring role, organizing block parties and community picnics. Todd didn't even blink. He assumed I had rolled over. But what he didn't realize was that I had just walked through the front door of his castle. And from the inside, I was going to burn it down. They say the best way to destroy a system is from within. And that's exactly what I planned to do. After that $500 fence fine, I stopped arguing. Stopped emailing. Stopped resisting. To Todd, it looked like I had finally submitted. Like I had accepted my place as just another quiet homeowner in his kingdom. But in reality, I had entered the shadows of his little empire. And I was learning every weakness in his walls. It started small. I joined the HOA's social committee, a harmless little group responsible for holiday events and block parties. Todd didn't care about the social committee. That's why it was perfect. I attended every meeting, took notes, kept my head down. I smiled. I nodded. I even laughed at Todd's jokes. I learned how he ran things. How he controlled board votes by only informing his allies when meetings were scheduled. How he buried paperwork under fake processing delays. How he dismissed any dissenting opinion with charm when people were watching, and cold intimidation when they weren't. I wasn't just observing. I was building a map of his power. It took a year and a half, but eventually, I ran for a board position. Unopposed. Elected without fuss. Now I wasn't just inside the system, I was at its heart. As a board member, I gained access to reports and records, at least, the ones Todd chose to share. And here's where things got suspicious. The HOA budget was massive, much higher than other neighborhoods in the area. But the amenities? Falling apart. The pool was closed every other week due to maintenance. The landscaping looked neglected and dry. The community center had peeling paint and broken lights. Yet somehow, we had enough in the budget to throw a $7,000 Christmas party last year, for 40 people. I started asking questions. Quiet ones. Safe ones. Hey, Todd, can I see last year's maintenance invoices? Mind if I help review vendor proposals for the landscaping renewal? Every time, I was met with the same answer. Don't worry about it. I've got it handled. That's when I knew, I had to dig deeper. Turns out, I wasn't the only one with questions. After a few friendly conversations during dog walks and mailbox runs, I learned that dozens of neighbors had tried asking for financial records in the past. Every single one of them. Ignored. Some of them had been fined after their requests mysteriously got lost. Others were given the cold shoulder or accused of disrupting the peace. One neighbor, an elderly woman, told me her late husband always suspected Todd was pocketing funds, but he gave up after receiving 2 consecutive violations for yard debris that didn't exist. I started building a list. People Todd had silenced. Questions Todd never answered. Numbers that didn't add up. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a pattern. Under the HOA bylaws, any board member can file a formal written request for access to the financial records. So, I did just that, following every rule, submitting it properly, and even CC'ing the entire board. I waited. No response for 10 days. Then 20. Then 30. Finally, Todd sent a short reply. The files are not available at this time. Working on an updated report. That was a lie. There was no updated report. So, I filed a second request, this time, invoking legal language from the state HOA statutes. That got his attention. At the next board meeting, he finally handed me a flash drive. Everything you need is here, he said, smiling too hard. I took it home, plugged it in. and stared at what can only be described as organized chaos. Invoices were mislabeled. Receipts were missing. Thousands were marked as administrative expenses with no breakdown. One vendor was listed as Clearview Landscaping LLC. The address? A P.O. box. The phone number? Disconnected. I ran a business license search, no record of that company in the state database. Then I found it. A $15,000 payment labeled Emergency Landscape Overhaul. The check had been deposited into a bank account under the name J.T. Holdings. Guess whose full name is Jacob Todd Henderson? Yeah. J.T. I wasn't just dealing with petty fines anymore. I was looking at felony-level embezzlement. I spent weeks compiling evidence. Cross-referencing check numbers with bank statements. Interviewing neighbors who had witnessed suspicious activity. Printing screenshots, highlighting figures, organizing everything into a color-coded binder. I even got a signed notarized statement from a former contractor who claimed Todd offered him under-the-table payments to inflate service costs. One neighbor, a retired accountant, volunteered to double-check my findings. She found even more discrepancies. Over $50,000 missing in just 2 years. I created a full digital report with spreadsheets, timeline breakdowns, and supporting documents. Then I printed 30 bound copies. One for every homeowner. One for each board member. And 2 extra, for the police and our HOA's lawyer. Now I had the match. All I needed was the right time to light it. So I waited for the annual HOA meeting. The one night of the year when the whole neighborhood shows up. In past years, barely a dozen residents attended. This time, I made sure everyone came. I went door to door. I made phone calls. I told people, just enough, to get them curious. Angry. Ready. By the night of the meeting, the community center was full. Standing room only. And Todd had no idea the bomb I was about to drop. The annual HOA meeting used to be a ghost town. 10, maybe 12 people showed up. Most of them bored, half listening, just eager to go home. But this year, it looked like a political rally. Every chair filled. Neighbors standing along the walls. A low hum of voices, whispers, suspicion, anticipation. And at the center of it all, Todd. Dressed sharp, smiling wide, clipboard in hand like always. He walked in like he owned the place, like the king returning to his court. He had no idea that tonight was his execution. Todd called the meeting to order, just like always. Let's keep this quick, folks. We'll go through the financial report, touch on upcoming projects, then wrap up. His voice was calm, casual. He even made a few jokes to ease the crowd. But the energy in the room was different. Eyes weren't glazing over this time. They were locked on him. Watching. I waited. I let him go through the budget slides, which, of course, were vague and sanitized. No real numbers. Just bullet points and meaningless fluff. When he asked if there were any questions, I stood up. Yes, actually, Todd. I have a few. About the finances. He blinked. We can take individual questions afterward. No, I said, louder now. This concerns everyone. I walked to the front of the room and placed a stack of 30 bound reports on the table. These are copies of a financial audit I conducted, with assistance from a licensed accountant and multiple residents. Inside, you'll find detailed documentation showing that over $50,000 in HOA funds have been misused, misreported, and in some cases, stolen. The room went silent. I started passing them out, row by row. People flipped through the pages, their expressions shifting from curious to shocked to furious. Page 5 shows a $15,000 payment to a non-existent landscaping company. Page 9. Payments made to accounts linked directly to Todd. Page 14. Testimonies from neighbors and a former contractor. Todd's face had gone pale. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "This is a smear campaign." "You'll also find," I continued, "copies of formal requests for financial transparency that were ignored for years. Requests that legally had to be fulfilled. They weren't. Now people were speaking up. Wait, you took our money. That's why the pool's been closed for months. You fined me for a flower pot, and you've been stealing from us." Todd tried to cut in, raising his hands. "These accusations are baseless. I've done everything by the book." "Then you shouldn't mind an audit," I said. "A real one. Conducted by professionals. Independent. Transparent." That's when the shouting started. People weren't just angry, they were betrayed. This wasn't about HOA dues anymore. It was about trust. Community. Fairness. One woman stood up with tears in her eyes. "I paid that $300 trash bin fine while I was taking care of my dying mother. And he was spending our money on what? Fake companies?" Another man shouted from the back. "I saw his kids swimming in the closed pool all summer while mine stayed home. It was chaos. A mob without pitchforks." Todd stood there, trying to hold it together, sweating through his collar, mumbling about how he'd been under a lot of stress and how things may have been mismanaged. But it was too late. I raised my voice again, over the noise. I motioned for an immediate vote to remove Todd Henderson as HOA president. Effective tonight. A chorus of "seconded" echoed through the room. We had the legal quorum. We had the votes. Hands shot into the air, some shaking with anger, others trembling with satisfaction. Final count. 34 for removal. 0 against. Even his former allies didn't defend him. Todd didn't even try to argue anymore. He just sat down. For the first time, Todd didn't look powerful. He looked small. Exposed. Finished. We appointed an interim president, someone trusted and neutral. A retired school principal, honest to the bone. First order of business. We vote to hire an external auditor. Full transparency. No more secrets. The entire room applauded. People came up to me afterward, some with tears, others with hugs, a few just quietly saying, "Thank you." I didn't do it for praise. I did it for justice. But yeah, it felt good. Really, really good. Todd packed up his papers and left quietly. No speech. No apology. Just the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall. No one clapped. No one said goodbye. He walked out a disgraced man. And that's how the tyrant of our neighborhood fell, not with fists or fury, but with facts, patience, and truth. I clicked through the PowerPoint slides with quiet precision. Slide after slide showed spreadsheets of misused funds. HOA checks written directly to Todd's business account. Invoices for landscaping work that was never done, except, curiously, at Todd's own property. HOA funds were being drained, and the pattern of theft was unmistakable. You could feel the oxygen leaving the room as people realized the gravity of what they were seeing. "This," I said calmly, "is $7,200 paid for tree removal that never occurred. Not in the community. But look, here are photos from Todd's backyard the same week. Notice anything missing?" Murmurs erupted. A neighbor gasped. I paused. Let it sink in. Here's a $2,000 bill for community signage upgrades. None of us saw a single new sign. But here, on his business's website, you'll find the exact signs, used as examples of his recent work. And they're installed in front of a private real estate office owned by Todd's cousin. Then, the final slide. Greater than $52,714.89 in unauthorized expenses over the last 18 months. Todd stood up, red-faced and stammering. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. I've done nothing illegal. This is a misunderstanding. I calmly handed a sealed envelope to the board chair. Not according to the certified forensic accountant I hired to audit the HOA's financials, I said. That envelope contains a notarized report, fully itemized, with cross-checked invoices, bank transfers, and statements from contractors who were either never paid or had their names used fraudulently. He tore open the envelope like it might save him. As he scanned the document, his face turned pale. I didn't authorize an audit, Todd spat, his voice cracking. You didn't have to, I said. A majority of the board did. Boom. But I wasn't done. From my bag, I pulled out a small folder. Before this meeting, I forwarded the evidence to the local district attorney. I also spoke with a fraud investigator from the state auditor's office. Todd took a step back. And based on what they saw, the police have been notified, I added, just as two officers walked into the room. Right on cue. Todd tried to leave. I don't have time for this circus. The officers stepped in front of him. Mr. Hartley, we'd like to speak with you about some financial discrepancies regarding your position on the HOA. He exploded. This is a witch hunt. You'll all regret this. But he didn't fight. He didn't resist. Just stood there as the cops walked him out. The silence he left behind was louder than any scream. The moment Todd left the room, it felt like a heavy fog had lifted. People clapped. Some laughed nervously. A few even cried, not out of sympathy for Todd, but out of relief. One woman turned to me and whispered, I thought I was crazy. I kept telling my husband something was off. I just smiled. You weren't crazy. He just made sure no one questioned him. Todd was formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of public funds within the month. Turns out, this wasn't even his first time dabbling in financial shoddiness. An old business partner came forward and filed a civil suit, too. Meanwhile, the HOA entered a full audit and reformation phase. I didn't want to be president, I made that very clear, but I was voted in unanimously by the board to lead the transition. We froze accounts, hired an external management firm to oversee spending, and established a community oversight committee. People started coming out of their homes again. The neighborhood felt alive. For the first time in years, our monthly meetings were filled with laughter, discussion, and transparency. It was beautiful. One afternoon, a few weeks after the fallout, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. I hope you're proud of yourself. You ruined my life over a stupid fence. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the $500 fine notice he'd once mailed me. Was I proud? Not for the pain he suffered, but for the justice that was finally served. He tried to control people through fear, threats, and manipulation. But in the end, it wasn't his power that brought him down. It was his ego. All I did was hold up the mirror. Sometimes, the loudest men fall with the quietest push. This wasn't just about offense. This was about power, arrogance, and a man who thought no one would ever question him. But when you corner the wrong neighbor, you don't just lose your position, you lose everything. If you enjoyed this story of justice and sweet revenge, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Have you ever had an HOA horror story? Let's hear it.